I'm honored to bring together people that have overcome adversity and challenge in their own lives to give other people hope and a path out, no matter how dark the spot you're in may seem. And we've had, all walks of life, all professions here with us. And today is really a unique episode. I'm joined by two close friends and a mother and a daughter who are going to share their experience of overcoming substance abuse in one of their lives and how a mother dealt with that. So I'm joined today by the owner and founder of Bridge the Gap, Lyle Wick. Hello, Lyle.
Hello.
Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Of course, and her mother and dear friend and one of our highly regarded marriage and family therapists in our area, Kimberly Wick.
Hi, Charlie.
Good.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, I was so looking forward to this episode. As I was sharing before, when I sit down every year, I do a smashing addiction talk where I, as a way to continue to break the stigma associated with alcoholism and addiction, I share my story and the path that I walked in. The most significant question I always get is how to help somebody, a family member, a loved one who's struggling. And I know you've both committed yourselves to that space, both from a therapy standpoint, both of you having a therapy practice, and then also with your case management company. And so many families struggle. So for you to be vulnerable and share with our listeners today what that journey was like is so powerful. So I just thank you for your courage, your vulnerability, and all that you do to help others.
Thank you.
Yeah.
We're really grateful to be here.
Yeah, it's amazing. And so, I think for all of us, I think the pathway to where we are started somewhere. And, as a way for everyone to relate, I've heard so many different origin stories. I'd like to really hear, Lyle, from you, your origin story of kind of what early life was like, where you grew up, and how the feelings associated with being you required some form of substance to deal with. So where'd you grow up, and how'd you grow up?
Yeah, so I grew up in Westwood in Los Angeles, and I have a sister who's 3 years younger, and my mom and my dad. And, I think back, it's so funny going through my story. I always remember different details every time. And I think back to my earlier life. My dad struggled with alcoholism. And so naturally, I followed in my mom's footsteps of being an enabler and wanting to control the situation. He also struggled with type 1 diabetes. And so the caretaker role came on really strong from a young age. I think that this is all over the map, but we ended up going to Al-Anon, which was so huge for both of us. My mom would bring me and my sister to Alla-Preteen and Alla-Teen. And so that really helped in terms of gaining knowledge about what my dad was going through. But for me, growing up in an environment with alcoholism, and now knowing that it's such a family disease and dynamic, I really struggled with not feeling good enough. And I think that originated with my dad of not feeling good enough for him to stop drinking.
Wow. What an incredible insight.
Yeah. Well, therapy in grad school helped.
Yeah. Well, I mean, look, when we know better, we do better. And I think that's one of the things that's so courageous and so amazing for both of you to be here. I just shot an episode, as you know, with my mom, and the vulnerability of the truth, and the power of the truth, which isn't good. It's not good or bad. It's just what happened. And what we do with it is really where the power comes in. And so for you to look back through that rearview mirror and see how it can serve you, so that as you look through the windshield, you're able to not just heal yourself, but use that experience to relate to others. Because I think a lot of people struggle with not good enough. Mm-hmm. Not good enough for what? I always ask people, but where did it come from? And so not good enough for my dad to want to stop drinking is a powerful realization. And that's really those subtle neural pathways that you get as a child really dig deep. Because if I'm not good enough, as a child, there's a book called The Secret to the Slight Edge, says champions are born and none unmade. And so these subtle little neural pathways of, if the person who cares for me the most isn't able to love me, there must be something wrong with me. And it doesn't take much more than that little spark of doubt to really burn a fire of not good enough.
Definitely. And I think along with not good enough, it was not feeling safe. Like you said, it's if your primary caretaker from a young age isn't able to provide you with safety, which is just one of the most basic human needs, then it goes across the board. And, I think that was the biggest starter point, is not feeling good enough. And it translated into growing up around a lot of wealth. And, although we were very fortunate and comfortable, I ended up going to an all-girls school with a lot of celebrity kids. And it translated there to not feeling good enough, not being wealthy enough, not having all the things. And so just across the board, it was this ongoing thing that I was able to feel good enough when I found substances, or it didn't matter because I wasn't in my own skin.
Yeah, that's powerful. And I think what people, I talk about a spark becoming a flame. I mean, confirmation bias says we're going to seek what we believe. We're going to seek to confirm, most of our beliefs are either confirming, or developing a new belief. And so you were confirming that not good enough. So all of the kids that you saw at school, the cars that they drove, the clothes, they're all just confirming that initial spark of not good enough and just feeding it, saying, see, I told you so, see, I told you so, see, I told you so. I think that's an amazing acknowledgement and amazing awareness for people to see, is really, where your attention goes, your energy flows, and what you seek, you will find. And you kept finding reasons to believe what you thought.
Exactly. Yeah. And confirm that obviously on an unconscious level, but it was a cycle. Like you said, it's okay, I'm going to surround myself with these people because it makes me feel less than. And continuing, although I had the knowledge after going to preteen and Al-Anon, I had the knowledge of, okay, my dad is sick. It's not that he doesn't love me, but even with that, especially when it's a parent, it was really hard to fully believe that, of like, why can't he stop for me, until I got into my own addiction and I really understood that it wasn't about me. It was about something that took over. Wow.
So Kim, I mean, let's kind of flash. I mean, this is, I think I talked a little bit about Don Miguel Ruiz's son wrote a book about attachment. And in this book, he talks about our lives being like a 5-screen movie theater. And, as Lyle sits in the movie theater at this stage of her life watching this movie, if she were to get up and walk out and walk into the theater next door and play out this same, scene of her life, but she's not watching it. The movie would seem, very different in a lot of ways, because your experience, the lens you're seeing that through is very different. So, what was, as a mother, and as a wife, with a husband in active addiction, what was your lens of this kind of early family like for you? And what did you see happening with Lyle at that time?
Well, prior to the obvious addiction, which we didn't see for quite a while because Michael's juvenile diabetes, when he would get low on blood sugar, it would mimic being drunk. He would get cognitively off and he would want to sleep and so on and so forth. And so there's a couple of things. He went into renal failure when Lyle was 5, and we did 2 years of home dialysis from 5 to 7. When Michael, and at that time, his drinking wasn't crazy or noisy. I remember at that time, like, thinking occasionally, you've had enough, but never really considering that he was an alcoholic. When he got very ill and went into renal failure, it was so interesting because Lyle and Michael at that point were really inseparable. And once it was talked about that Dad was sick and he was going on dialysis 12 hours a day, every day at home, I saw energetically Lyle just shut down and made a complete shift. And so watching that, Lyle and I became inseparable because I dove in to do everything I could to help this 5-year-old manage with this. And I have always been a big communicator, so I also knew that it was important to help her express herself. From my vantage point, I understood the challenges that she was facing. She talked to me sometimes about, the kids that she was around and the houses, and her grandparents had a really lovely home in Holmby Hills. And so my parents had a lot of the things that Lyle's friends had. And so did her cousins. And so I think from that, she was always in this arena with people who had more than we did, although we were very comfortable. And then the combination of having her dad be ill, it was just dynamite. It really was. And during his renal failure, he had a period of time where he was drinking to manage his feelings. And so I would try my best to shield the kids from that, just, being in uncharted waters myself. So I didn't see Lyle as she describes it completely, because I was so close to her and we had a blast. We had these Saturday morning field trips where the kids they had a book and they got to pick anywhere in the greater LA area that they wanted to go to. And every Saturday morning, my two daughters and I were off to do a field trip. And so life between the two of us and connecting and talking and playing together was going along smoothly.
Yeah, I think that's a really important observation for people that are listening, is to realize that the subtleties of the internal dialogue and the internal narrative and the pain that we're facing can mask itself and not really present itself to us. And despite the fact that we think we're doing everything we can, that inside, and I think people feel a certain lack of power. Like, I should have known, or I should have done more, or I could have, I should have, if I had, I would have. And sometimes in the moment, you're just doing the best you can as a mother, as a parent, as a father, and there's it really does sound like a five alarm fire is burning, but there's no alarms going off. It's you've got enough kind of socks over the smoke detectors with the books and the trips and the distractions that the fire might be burning, but there's no alarm sounding. Does that resonate?
100%, absolutely. And oddly, when this all went down, I took the girls to a psychologist therapist, and the first thing she had them do, and I was in the session, was draw a picture of their family. And Lyle drew a picture of us, and Michael and I were on either side of the girls, and Michael had no arms. And it was just so odd that she would draw this. She's such an awesome artist, but she drew her dad without arms, like he couldn't hold her. And we were recently cleaning out our home office and found a picture that she drew a few years later, or probably, you were like preteen, and our whole family, and she had herself X'd out. And so those are very telling signs that internally there were things that were very, very deep. And I used to always say about Lyle, still waters run deep. She has a very calm exterior, and boy, is she deep.
Yeah, and I think this is, asterisk footnote to parents, as present as you may be, as much as you may be involved, going to psychologists, doing all the things that you would think are creating this kind of safety net around what perils may lie ahead, that those internal waters are deep, and we don't know where they're going to come out. And Lyle, for you, I see the not good enough narrative, but then I also see, as I hear about dialysis and home medical devices coming in, and I know for kids, the family unit, mom and dad together, the loving family, that image that we have, we want to hold on to. And so seeing this kind of, medical equipment coming in, and your dad's health being at risk, and so you've got a lot going on. Is my dad going to be okay? Is what kind of rings in my head as you see all this going on. And so where are you going to find comfort for this not good enough, and for this fear and this kind of overwhelming sense that there's a medical condition with my dad too, and so you're trying to find any kind of grounding point, and so you did find it when you first picked up, is that right?
Yeah, so I mean, I think like my mom said, from a young age, I shut down. I don't fully recall like, oh, I'm gonna shut off
Of
all
course.
of a sudden, but
We have great words to describe what happened to us as
yeah,
kids, right?
exactly. And yeah, exactly. So I obviously learned to shut down from a really young age, and I saw my dad do it. So it was mirrored to me. So obviously what helps shutting down is getting out of your body or mind. And from a young age, I do remember we had a little bar at our house, and I would take the shot glasses thinking they were my size. And I would go when no one was looking, probably from age 7, and pour alcohol or whatever, I wasn't picky, whatever was there, into the shot glass. And I remember just feeling something that wasn't what I was feeling. And it got me out of me, which I hated being in my own skin because I was uncomfortable, and I didn't have the languaging or the emotional intelligence at that age to communicate it, or really know what to do with it or be able to give it a name. And so I continued to do that over the years. I sometimes, from my recollection, I would be able to have little sips of wine here and there. And one New Year's, my mom and I had some champagne. I'm not sure how old I was. It was, it was probably a little risky, but it was a blast. And I loved that feeling. And I quickly, developed the disease of more is better, and wanting more. And, it's progressive. So then I got into smoking weed with friends, and then there were pills, and it went on from there. And it was more is better, and the stronger the better, and it took over, and I lost sight of myself and that part of me that that was the good, and that I was connected to when I was younger.
Yeah, that young innocence. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
the fear, the anxiety, the fear, and I always say it's hard to be comfortable in your own skin when you're in life's wardrobe closet, changing it all the time, trying to fit in. And that's what, a lot of what I hear is just not really understanding how to be comfortable. And there's a lot of things going on that would make me uncomfortable and that made you uncomfortable. And so, Kim, did you see at this point, as the little, Barbie doll shot glasses are being consumed and the smoking, are you seeing changes now as a parent? Are you involved in the chaos at home with your husband, or are you seeing signs, with Lyle, that are showing signs that something's amiss?
I didn't see it until she was about 16. And the interesting thing is that all the while she's talking about what she was going through from an early age, Lyle and I would lay in bed every single night before she fell asleep and talk for about a half hour. And we communicated like open-ended questions, I statements. We talked about souls being attached to bodies and all kinds of wondrous things. And she was so much fun to converse with because she was such an old soul. And I did feel very concerned around the trauma she was going through. What she hasn't mentioned are the ambulance calls for her dad, the low blood sugars, that he went into a few psychotic breaks where many, many times we had to call an ambulance to our home, and it became so frequent to get help for him that the neighbors asked the girls, "Oh, is your dad okay?" "Oh, it wasn't our dad. The dog had a problem," when they were really little because they were so embarrassed. And so what I noticed was Lyle's coping tools were amazing on the outside to manage these very traumatic events that happened. The night about the night that she's talking about, the millennium was so much fun. And I always had the attitude, like my parents growing up, that if they're allowed to have like a little sip here and there of wine, they won't want to get smashed when they're at a party because it won't be some big taboo thing. And I just remember that night as being so much fun when we turned 2000. Lyle and I stayed up. Michael had gone to bed early, and we stayed up talking about, if the world was going to crash at midnight. And her sister was sitting up on the couch asleep, and she was just so cute. She was 6 at the time. And we dragged her down the hall sleeping and put her to bed, and we stayed up late into the night talking. So I didn't recognize that. I knew she was going through a very challenging life, but I didn't recognize to the extent that it was really, really impairing her on the inside.
Yeah, I think, it's going to be so enlightening for people to hear because, there are lots of theories, right? There's how do we control, how do we protect, how do we, ensure the path our children or our loved ones go on is the one that's the best for them. Do we give them little sips? Do we not have them have anything? Do we take them to therapy? Do we take them to Alateen? We can do as much as we can do, but at the end of the day, the universe is really powerful, and I'm just so drawn to the early dishonesty. I mean, because I relate to it. And I think when I see these common threads that run through people with substance abuse issues lives, I grew up in a very different but similar home. So violence was the soup du jour at my house. Violent abuse against my mom, violent child abuse against me. And when I went to school, it was to fit in, and so I lied about the kind of house I grew up with. And people, talk about dishonesty, at a survival level differently than they do about innocent dishonesty. Like, did you break that? No, I didn't break that, so you don't get in trouble. We're lying about who we really are. We're lying about our true essence. It's like, I don't feel safe. My dad went to the hospital because he's not well, and I'm really scared. That's honest. The dog's sick. I'm covering. We start at this early age to cover up and put masks on to change what we think people think of us so we can fit in. And what I want to tell people is that we do things in pattern because we get a payoff. And you were getting a payoff from that dishonesty, which was not having to deal with the reality of the fear, the terror, and the chaos, which was your actual life, as I did. And when you live with that kind of imbalance, you need something to ground you. And substances will do that. I think that's why we're able to hide it, because we've learned to hide so many other things. I think it's interesting, that we don't see the pain on the inside, but we've really watched her learn to hide so much. In hindsight, when you look back through the rearview mirror as we learn these lessons, it's like, well, of course, I watched her lie about why the ambulance was coming, so why wouldn't she be lying to me about what she was drinking? And no mom, no dad, the talks on the bed at night with the pillows and the candles lit, they're great, and you're better off for them. But if there's other factors, if there's dishonesty, if there's chaos that we're not dealing with, you still got a towel over a smoke alarm, and the fire's still burning.
Yes, and I had no reason to question Lyle for a long, long time. There was just she was like a straight A student. Child. She was the perfect child. Got straight A's for years and years and years, and protected herself that way.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, so was school an escape for you? I mean, so did you see validation in getting good grades? I mean, how did, because I'm interested to hear how resilience, I think, is an incredible human characteristic. Yeah. And your resilience is not lost on me, because despite at a young age having these feelings, you're still doing well in school. And is that because you're pursuing this good? I'll show you I'm good enough in other ways. I'm going to attach my worth to grades. I'm going to attach my worth to fitting in. I'm going to attach some people attach their worth to sports. Where did the good grades, the good girl, let me show you who I am kind of come into play for you?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, and first I want to say I think it's really dichotomous in terms of I had really good moments with my mom and our relationship, and this is where the double life started for me, because which I didn't even know, that there was this other part of me that was really struggling, which is probably why I didn't bring it up, and I just disconnected. I was able to really compartmentalize, and I learned how to manipulate situations, and that's where that good girl thing came in is, one, I walked on eggshells. I didn't want to upset my dad. I didn't want to rock the boat in any way. So, I knew how to get good grades. That was easy. Definitely fitting in. That came into play in terms of fitting in with my peers because they got good grades. And, I think that good girl attitude that I put off of, I am the perfect child, I don't rock the boat, I don't do anything that someone would raise an eye to, I don't create any drama at home. That was really just a way for me to manipulate the situation and try and work things to be in my favor. Of, I don't want more drama at home, I don't want my mom and dad to fight. What can I do to try and limit that? And that was to essentially be the quote-unquote perfect child.
Denying the whole time the real feelings you're having. I mean, this is where I think people need to understand when they have, I think we have two dials, I think, in our lives, right? We have our beliefs and we have our behaviors. And when I say beliefs, I mean beliefs about ourselves, beliefs about the world, and behaviors, the actual things that we do on a day-to-day basis. And there's a certain power in those two things being in alignment. And for me, and I hear the exact same with you, your beliefs about yourself were really turned way down. What you really felt about yourself, but your behavior dial was turned way up. And what I share, and I think is so true, is that that's incompatible, and it's not able to be, it's not consistent. You can't live that way. Ultimately, one of those dials, either you're going to turn your beliefs and get yourself right about what you think about yourself, or your behaviors are going to start to ratchet down, because it's not sustainable to live with those two dials out of alignment for a very long time. I can show case after case after case, including my own life and many others, who lived out of alignment, and ultimately it's not sustainable. And that's kind of what I see for you. The beliefs are dialed down, but I'm going to make it up with behaviors. I'm going to attach my worth to things, to outcomes, which makes us really susceptible when a bad grade comes, or a friend doesn't like us, or a boyfriend or girlfriend breaks up with us. All of a sudden, I'm starting the outcome thing is starting to get a little shaky. And so that calls for a little more self-soothing. Does any of that resonate with you?
Yeah, completely. My insides didn't match what I was putting off to the world. And I got so good at being dishonest that I believed half of the time that everything's okay, my life's okay. Obviously substances, as I incorporated that, helped me not connect to the reality of what's actually going on here, and I'm really struggling, and I'm not okay. But if I believed it, then maybe it would be true, and maybe not being aligned inside and outside didn't matter anymore, but it always catches up to you. And I think that's why you ultimately end up crashing and burning, and hopefully being able to grow from that. But 100%.
Yeah, that's the first thing that we really do. I mean, when I read somewhere that more than most alcoholics and addicts leave a double life to the outside world, we present this stage care show. I was like, fuck, I've been doing that since I was like 6 years old. Are you kidding me? And for us, it was survival. And so, and you talked a little bit about the progression. So, I want to get into the progression of the disease of alcoholism, because it is chronic, it is progressive, and as we know, it is deadly. And so, we go from kind of self-soothing a little bit and being able to kind of keep it all together. But it sounds like that's short-lived, that the wheels start to come off for you now a little bit more as you continue to use substances to quell the chaos at home. And so how does that progression look for you?
Yeah, I mean, mine was extremely short-lived. I went hard and crashed by the age of 18, and that's when I got sober. But the progression, I think it's the physical progression and the mental. The physical was as more things became available, and as I got more into high school and people were, they had coke and they had ecstasy, and it was socially acceptable to do those things, I was like, great, this is awesome, I'm having a blast. And with that, obviously, I'm not going to go home and say, Mom, I did coke tonight. Are you proud of me? Obviously, that double life got really strong because I got into my selfishness of I want to do exactly what I want to do, and I don't want you to get in my way. But I want you to love me and think I'm this person, because if you don't, I'm so attached to what you think of me and codependent on that I will think even less of myself. And so the progression's, really normal in terms of partying in high school. I got connected with this dealer when I decided I really liked coke. And this is after getting my doctor to prescribe me Adderall so I could study for whatever test. And I was like, this is great. I feel really efficient. I feel like I can get a lot done. And I felt like I was carrying the weight of the world on my shoulders, being a caretaker to my dad, trying to get through high school, which is hard in itself for anyone. And I felt like that gave me this invincibility of I can do it all. And I can not sit in my negative self-talk when I'm doing this. And so that dealer, I lived on the edge. He lived a life that was beyond different than mine. And I started dating him. And from there, it was a go, because I had full access to all drugs. I was, he lived a much different lifestyle than I did. I was hanging out in Compton with him, with his friends, and it's the polar opposite of how I was raised.
Yeah, that strikes me.
It got really strong really quick. Like, it just
Did you
180.
ever have a moment of sitting there with him in Compton in his whatever he was driving with whatever he was wearing, going, how the fuck did I end up here? Or did it become normal for you? I mean, this is really important that as for most of the people listening, they're going to say, how did this beautiful A student at private girls' school from Westwood end up with a drug dealer in Compton? I mean, that doesn't happen. Well, it does happen.
Right.
And here's how it happened. And did it seem normal to you, or did you ever have these moments, or was it a combination of both?
It was a combination of both. I think the further I got into it, the more, not normal, but desensitized I became to it.
Great word.
So I, when I would have those moments of, and I would describe it as feeling dirty. So I just felt disgusting in my skin because there was cognitive dissonance. I knew what was right. I knew what we were doing together wasn't right for me. And so because of that, I was even more uncomfortable in my skin, which I had to just pound anything, any substance, to not feel that. And at this point, I was in a perpetual cycle. I felt scared to leave the relationship, even if I wanted to. And it just felt like, I remember thinking, oh my God, if I ever want to have kids and I have to get pregnant, like, I'm going to have to stop doing this for 9 months. I wonder if there's any way around that. And, that's where my head was.
Yeah.
And prior to getting sober, there was a moment where I looked in the mirror, and I remember telling my mom this. I looked in the mirror like the night before, and I was so not okay. And I couldn't see a soul behind my face. And so that moment of clarity, which I think to a degree we all are capable of having, it's oftentimes just masked by drugs and alcohol and pushed down. And so that was a huge thing for me that I believe was what helped me to accept help that moment.
So I have to shift over to Mom, because when I hear favorite books, field trips on Saturday, warm talks on the pillow at night, and now I hear my daughter's in Compton with a drug dealer. I mean, were you aware of the turn in her life and where she was, or was she like a lot of kids? I'm over at Sally's and Sally's covering for Lyle, or had you become aware that she had really fallen deep into this double life?
I knew something was going on, and I couldn't catch her.
You crafty little thing.
Thank you.
I could not catch her, and Wow, there's so much. Looking back, there were many things that I would have done differently had I had the hindsight to move forward.
Well, part of this is, part of this, and I mean, the courage, vulnerability of this experience is almost overwhelming for me. I mean, this is such an opportunity for people to really hear from two incredible souls that are so courageous and so vulnerable. And thank you for sharing these scars and these healing moments with us so other people can learn. Because I think, part of the reason I do this is because people do suffer in silence. Mothers suffer in silence. Daughters suffer in silence. Sons, brothers, uncles suffer in silence because they feel so alone and isolated in their situation. They see no way out. They don't see a way to look in the mirror. They don't see a way to make a phone call. And so I'm just so honored and really privileged to have you say that, and then be able to look back and say, yeah, you could have done things different, but using that now to help other people is so amazing. So what did you see? What didn't you do? And what would you encourage people to do? Because it sounds like you did a lot, by the way. I mean, it's not like you were at the bars, drowning your sorrows. I mean, you were at home taking your kids to therapy. They were with psychologists. You were taking them to Alateen. I mean, this is not an absent mother who just said, well, I can't do anything. I mean, you're doing a lot. And it's interesting, I'm sure we all think we could do more, but you were doing a lot, but it wasn't enough. The beast was out of the cage. Lyle didn't like herself. Lyle couldn't live with herself, and she was off and running. So now it's what could you do?
I had a lot of challenges during that time. Both my parents died 10 months apart. And I think that was another trauma for Lyle because they lived a mile away from us and were second parents to Lyle and Sally. My husband and he passed away on the week before last Christmas. But we separated in 2005, so Lyle was 14 then. I had full legal and physical custody of my daughters, so I was raising them pretty much on my own. And I was getting sicker, even though I was going to Al-Anon and had a sponsor. I was getting sicker by the moment because the shit was hitting the fan, and I didn't know how to manage and try to rescue, control, save, make my family okay, and get my own oxygen from coming out of a really challenging marriage. And so, yes, today I look back and I know I did the very best that I could, and I don't have regrets. I just look back and think, what could have been in place that would have helped this situation?
And what's the answer? And I just love that I see Lyle, acknowledging the work you did do and how much you did try. And I'm sitting here, and the weight of all of that is heavy on me. The parents dying, the husband in active addiction, the juvenile diabetes, increasing, and the effects of it increasing. And the daughter now. I mean, it seems like a lot of shit hitting a lot of fans. I don't know where I'd put it. I don't know. I don't know where I would put the mop. Really. And so I'm interested to find out what's the answer to that question when you say what could have been in place. I mean,
boundaries. Boundaries. It's very simple. My dad used to always say, if something has to give, don't let it be you. But I didn't know how to take care of myself in a way that would have allowed me to set healthy boundaries in spite of what other people thought. And so what that would have looked like for us is for us to have less friends over all the time, family dinners, boundaries around where Lyle was at and going and calling parents and making sure that places were safe. Unfortunately, Lyle was very, very good at manipulating. And so there were a lot of the nights that she's talking about being in Compton with her boyfriend dealer, I really didn't know about because she waited until I went to bed and then left home and got home at like 5 a.m. before I woke up. So unless I got up and went into her room to check on her, I wouldn't have known that she was gone. And she unfortunately had this great bedroom downstairs. Our house was on a slope, and there was a door to the outside in the room next to her bedroom, so she could really sneak out of our home.
You also really had no reason to question me because we had developed such a strong relationship with trust, and until it got rocky, you trusted me.
I did trust her. Weird things were happening. For instance, there was a black BMW parked outside our house for months. And it always seemed to move on street cleaning days. And I kept asking the girls, like, I wonder whose BMW that is. That's so odd that that's outside our house. Well, it had been parked there from, I guess it was a carjacking.
It was a stolen car.
It was a stolen car.
Of course it was.
Yeah,
And
obviously.
Of course it was. How could you not have thought that?
Obviously.
And then I was in the house one day, and it literally felt like guns were shooting at the house. It was this very, very loud bop, 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 bop. And I walked outside the front door, and there must have been 1,000 eggs that hit the front of our house. So things like that started to happen. And at that time, I know that her boyfriend dealer was threatening to kill me and Sally if she left him, which is why she couldn't leave him.
Yeah, these are dark days, but what I hear is survival. Everyone's trying to survive. And, one of the things that when I work with young athletes, one of the things I train on the mental conditioning side is process. Control what you can control, focus on process, and do simple better. And I think it's amazing to me to hear what you talked about that you think can shape changes as you look back for people, which is simple things. Trust but verify. Call. Know your daughter's not going to want you calling the Simpsons to verify that she's going there because she doesn't want. But call. Have family dinner. Do these simple things that you can control. We still don't know whether that would have changed the outcome or not, but we know that the right thing to do, and that they're not complicated. And in chaos, if you can find, I just so appreciate you sharing, because they're not complex. Family dinner, verifying where my child is, some of the other things that you talked about that you would have done, but just do them and do them consistently. Will they change the outcome? I don't know, but they are the right thing to do. In a mixed chaos, there are certain things you can do, and that's really all we can really help people do, isn't it? Is just focus on the things that we can do.
And until things got really bad, it was difficult because my daughter was a straight A student, and so there were things about Lyle's life that, like, she walked on water for a long time as far as I was concerned. And but when things really went down, the one thing that I am so happy I did was, I call it the exorcism. When the shit hit the fan and I found the drugs in her car and took them to a lab, and like now the truth was revealed. And I had so much anger because I was worried and had been talking to Lyle's late father, and it was, I think she's doing meth, she's picking. I saw these signs. I knew something was going on, but I couldn't catch her. And my sponsor kept saying, you need to drug test her. And I was like, oh, drug test her, but then she'll think I don't trust her. Well, oh my God, like, how silly is that? But, so you do the best you can. But I remember sitting in the living room, and I think Lyle had relapsed after our initial, she was very close to graduation, and then we know you need help, we're going to get you help, blah, blah, blah. And I was so happy because when I got everything tested, all the paraphernalia and everything else, it only showed for coke. And I was like, oh, thank God there's no meth, because I was sure she had been using meth. And only shows you again, it's like my ability to deny the truth is so much in the front seat. But the night that I really felt like, okay, the devil is now living with us, when Lyle relapsed, I I don't know what happened to me. I had like this out of body experience that I was done. I couldn't live this way. I couldn't live in my fear. I couldn't live in my anger. I was so afraid for her, and I couldn't reach her also. And I just like lost it and said, get out of my house if you can't be sober, if you're not going to accept help, if you're not going to take this seriously, I'm done. And if you need to go couch surf or be on the street, I can't control that, but I'm actually done. And so
I believed her.
Wow. Yeah, that's, I mean, now we're talking boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
Boundaries have been set.
Well, I tend to go from one extreme to the next. So.
Yeah, but this is powerful. I mean, so, and I want to talk about two things. First is the idea of cognitive dissonance. I mean, you know, for people that don't understand cognitive dissonance, the best way I really always use the example of people that smoke cigarettes. You know it's not good for you. You know it's killing you. There's lots of evidence that shows it, but you don't want to stop yet. And so I call it the RJMs. Rationalize, justify, minimize. Either the behavior, you know, or the idea behind the behavior. One of those two things has to change in order to continue to engage in that behavior. So I'll stop. It's not that bad. I haven't been doing it that long. You start playing these mental games to justify, rationalize, and minimize that I'm actually doing something that's not good for you. But the real diffuser of that narrative is what you talked about, which is shame. You know, you said that warm blanket of shame, knowing that you're not doing something, and really the only antidote for shame. There's two antidotes for shame, in my opinion. It's either the light of the truth, you know, and the acknowledgement of the truth, or more shame, you know, and covering up the shame and putting a blanket on it. Either of those things will diffuse the narrative around shame, and so you continue to engage in, you know, behaviors that would numb the shame because you weren't ready to shine a light on it yet. Was that your experience in that dark place?
Yeah, I tried to bury the shame with some more shame, and
that's called the shame shit show.
Yeah, it was a shame shit show, and ultimately the shame gets so powerful that you can't bury it anymore. And you know, at that point, the hope is that you just get really honest. And I think, you know, to speak on shame, I created the coziest environment for shame to come and grow and just really take over. And so along with checking out, I couldn't face that shame especially because in my head, I'm like, oh my God, I've presented myself to be this perfect human. What happens when they find out who I really am? They're not going to love me anymore, you know? And so I was just feeding into that narrative of I'm not enough. And that's really why we're doing the work we do and why we're writing a book and doing these online classes, is because if we can't push through the shame, and it takes away the power, like you said, when you say it, it's so empowering to just cut through it and not give it a voice, you know, and take away its power by giving back and sharing your truth.
And this is where this podcast gets, for me, this is where the light comes on for me, is because despite a mother's worst nightmare, you know, her daughter in Compton in life-threatening situations, stolen cars in the front of the house, eggs, meth, positive drug test, coke, meth, picking, shame, guilt, bad boyfriend threatening to kill your family. It's the darkest days are here, but there is a light. And what was, so your mom calls it the exorcism. She set a boundary, and you said something really powerful, which is, I believed her, but there also was a point, and I don't know if this was about the same time, this opportunity that you had to look in the mirror and not see a soul and know that you wanted to change. So as your mom is setting boundaries, it sounds like you're getting to a point of acceptance where maybe you started to want some change, and so you heard her. Is that around the same time?
Yeah, it was I think the night before
Wow.
the exorcism that I mean, it was not me. I think of it as a power greater than myself just shined on me, of being able to have that moment. I was terrified, which I'm so grateful for that I was terrified, because I don't think I would have stopped had I not been terrified at that point of my circumstances, of my relationship, of I'd have those moments of clarity where I'm like, what is going on? You know, I could be arrested. These things that were so far-fetched from you know, my world growing up. And
and really your true essence. I mean, this is
Yeah.
not your true essence of who you really knew. I mean, you're sitting in front of me today, a real kind of reflection of your true essence. I think both you and your mom are sitting in front of me today, really, grounded in your true selves and really authentic selves, and what bright lights you both are. And I think that's what I really hope gives people hope, is that as dark as those days seem, it's just the little steps. So, so what were the little steps? I mean, for Mom, it was a big step, right? It was a lot of boundaries, and it was I'm done, which is, I think, two of the most powerful words that a person can say. I'm done. And then follow that up by some action. There's
Right.
intention and action. And so what were the things, Lyle, that you started to do differently? I mean, behavior is a great precursor to results, and when we change behaviors, we will start to change results. So what was the first bit of change that you started to feel that I could get out of this situation? Because it seems insurmountable.
Right. So
for most of us.
Absolutely. I think, I want to just say, I also think that parents are riddled. I mean, now having a daughter, I cannot fathom going through this. And I think they're riddled with guilt, with the divorce and my dad being sick, and I am speaking for you, so correct me if I'm wrong, but I think I didn't have a lot of boundaries because there was guilt, and I really was able to do what I wanted always, and that didn't serve me, but I was like, I have the cool mom, I can do whatever I want, I can go wherever I want, but when my mom started taking care of herself and setting those boundaries and putting her needs first, that allowed me to get better. It is a family disease. It's a family dynamic, and you fuel the fire. The enabler and the one who's addicted, it's, cohabitating. It just creates a flame you can't put out. And so for me, that boundary of I'm done and that exorcism, which was terrifying. She's small, but she can really set a boundary. Thank God.
Yeah.
But that moment almost felt like it gave me permission to get out, there was almost relief that she knew, because I felt so isolated and lonely and too scared to tell anyone anything, and really horrified because I did have that, version of me, that innocence and essence that I knew was there. And so the second she was able to set boundaries, although I was frustrated, that sick part of me was frustrated, I was able to get help. There was an option of getting treatment, and it was an option. It wasn't really an option. It was more of, this is what's going to happen. And although frustrated, I was so grateful, because those boundaries and her taking care of herself and saying, this is, if you're going to be in my space, this is how it's going to look, was the only thing that helped me get better, because I had the choice to either go live on the street, and a lot of people aren't in contact with themselves enough to be able to say, okay, that doesn't work for me. I don't want to be that uncomfortable. And they go on the street, and their journey's not over. And for me, that was enough at that time, whether it was that moment of clarity that allowed me to say, okay, I don't want to go live on the street. I don't want to go live at my boyfriend's because I'm terrified of what that looks like. But it laid the groundwork for me to, one, believe in myself, that she believes in me enough to be really firm. I can do this,
I think it's the most courageous moment that a parent has to endure with a situation like this. I mean, look, I'll go back to, if you do that again, you're not going to go to the dance on Saturday, and they do it again, and you say, well, no dance on Saturday, and then Saturday comes, and you're like, oh, everyone's going to be at the dance, and she's not going to be at the dance, and I don't want her to be left out. You know what? You've been good the rest of the week. Go to the dance. It's so much easier to kind of move those boundaries, because you're trying to protect them from some unknown, instead of just holding your boundary and teaching a lesson. And that's why, and that's a very subtle, kind of benign example to what you were dealing with, but I just think it's important for people to see that the actual catalyst to change was the healthy boundary that you set, and then it was up to you to decide what you wanted to do, and that it actually empowered you to feel like now I'm responsible to make a choice because she's made a choice, and I get to decide the life that I'm going to choose, or at least the path I'm going to choose. You don't know what, like you said, some will choose the streets and their journey's not over, and some will choose help, but the decision is ultimately yours. And I think, for parents, Kim, I mean, that's a scary statement to say. Live on the streets if you have to, but you can't be in my world the way that you're living. Knowing what the streets offer to a child, I mean, it's a scary thing to say. I think it's even more scary thing to enforce. But where did that courage come from for you? Because as a parent, I think anybody listening is going to cringe, at the thought of their child making the decision to go on the streets. I mean, you didn't know what Lyle was going to choose. Where did the courage come from, and how hard was that? Because it sounds hard.
Well, first of all, I just want to preface it with choosing that kind of a boundary is not for everyone. There are a lot of parents that I work with that would never be able to put their head on the pillow at night setting that kind of a boundary with their loved one, and that's okay too.
Yeah, I mean, I think a boundary is what we're able to enforce.
Exactly.
I mean, it doesn't have to be. I mean, yeah, I think that's a great
because I don't want people to hear this and think, oh, I'm not doing it right if I don't choose that.
Yeah, the boundary can be coming to family dinner. You have to be here for family dinner.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to take a drug test. I mean, there's lots of different boundaries. That's so great that you point that out. It's just having a boundary that's healthy and then having the courage to
follow through.
Yeah.
For me, it was anger.
Yeah.
My family had fallen apart. My parents had died. Sally was having some troubles. And life just felt completely and utterly overwhelming. I did not have the support from my ex-husband and was told that I was crazy when I would call and say Lyle has a problem. So it triggered me all over again with his addiction, saying, are you drinking? No, you're crazy. And it just was like being done with being in this family disease. And I also want to mention that just because Lyle got sober, our journey did not end then, because while she crashed quickly, her double life, she lost her footing in terms of being grounded in a moral compass that was hers, that guided her. And so even after she was physically sober and was passing drug tests and whatnot, she was not emotionally sober for a few years. And my education and growth continued at a very sharp learning curve because I was so proud of her for being physically sober. That was the target. That was the goal. If she's sober, everything's okay. That couldn't have been further from the truth. And so there really is no destination. Our work continues, life happens, and our work continues, and there's always a challenge in front. And when we realize that those challenges are golden opportunities for us to create internal change within ourselves so that we can continue to live a peaceful and serene life internally. It's a process, but things like a few years after she was sober, I still had the monkey brain as a parent because I had trauma. And so my trauma was pretty noisy. If the phone rang, I was like, is everything okay? I noticed something was off, and we had a home boundary. This is after she had been in treatment for 1 year and then was living on her own, and was so excited. I spent a year planning this trip to Europe and got tickets with mileage, and my friend's a travel agent, so we were like doing it on a dime, but it was this awesome 2.5-week trip to Europe. And I noticed something was off, and I just was like devastated because I thought, I am not spending money taking my daughters to Europe when there's an attitude. And so I thought about it, and I walked in the kitchen one day and I said, hey Lyle, I set up a drug test for you. I hadn't drug tested her for like a year in Simi Valley at this lab, and she was blown away, like, are you kidding me? I'm not using. And I said, well, That's great, but I need to know on paper for my monkey brain, because I sense something's going on and I just I can't seem to get the chatter out of my head. And so sure enough, her drug test came back. It was negative, and a few days went by and she came in and said, "Mom, I need to get honest with you." And I said, "Okay." And she said, "I dropped one of my classes." And so I think that's what you've been picking up on, because I have felt really bad, because our contract was that you need to be in this many classes and you need to have a job in order to live at my house. And so why I say the journey's not over when they get sober is because we still have to pay attention to our own internal barometer. If something's up and we're feeling something's up, something is up. It might not be obvious, but we need to investigate, what does that mean for us? Why am I feeling this way? Is it my trauma speaking? Feelings are not facts. So is something actually going on, or something normally is going on if we're having those strong feelings?
Yeah, it's just so, it's like the black car in front of the house for weeks and weeks and weeks. They're just saying, it's just a black car, but I know it's not a black car. You've learned to have a dialogue, to take some action. Feelings to me, it's like driving around without stoplights. There's red, yellow, and green, and feelings are just an acknowledgement, a warning sign, a signal, I guess I'll say, of my body or something needing attention. It could be good attention, it could be neutral, or it could be, a warning sign, but they're there for a reason. It's what we do with them that ultimately matters, and what you're doing now is healthy things. You're having a dialogue, you're explaining to her, I don't feel right. I don't know, Lyle, what your experience was of being defensive or acknowledging that your mom still got some trauma, but you're having an honest conversation and you're taking a healthy, direction, which is a drug test to verify. And then the truth comes out, which is, I'm back to a little guilt and shame, because I said I'd take so many classes and I can't handle that many classes, and I dropped one, and I feel guilty and couldn't tell you about it, but that's what's going on. And I'm sure learning to have those conversations, I think this is what you're communicating about, the journey not being over. Physical sobriety is really like a gateway to a rebirth of sorts, and it's like learning to live. I didn't know how to be honest. I don't know how to be honest just because I put down drinking. I've been lying since I was 6. I was still lying. I remember I went to buy a car in Thousand Oaks after I got sober, and I lied to the car salesman, about where I had been in Ireland. And it wasn't that it did me any good, but I just learned to lie.
Right.
So I just continued. It was like, oh my God, I'm really still stuck in this, loop of not knowing how to be honest. I've got to learn to be honest, just because the drink's gone. In fact, the drink was the solution, and people don't understand. The drink was the solution to life's problems. Now I've got to learn life's solution to life's problems, and that's, I think, what your mom's describing, is you're on this journey of now learning to self-regulate, to see a red, a green, a yellow, and know what to do with it. Oh, I want to drop a class. And so what can you tell people, Lyle, about kind of these behaviors, these things that you started to change, and the difference between, or the things you learned between being physically sober and then actually learning, I'll just continue to say, life solutions for life's problems instead of substance solutions to life's problems?
Right. Well, it became clear really quickly that the drugs and the alcohol weren't actually the problem. They were the solution, like you said. And that it really was my thinking and the shame. And, I think my mom having those boundaries, and there were so many more instances where I was at a sober living and I called her. I'm like, I need you to come get me. I am done here. I got into a fight with some of the girls, and she's like, I'm not doing that. And those moments helped me to not develop and live in shame further, because I had to deal with it, and I had to learn to fend for myself. And it's such a process. Some have the ability to reach it sooner than others and gain that emotional sobriety. For me, I had a lot of maturing to do. I had a lot of trauma to work through. I joined a 12-step program, and that was amazing for me, but I needed to be in it for a while.
Yeah.
Before I could really get the help that I needed to reach the emotional sobriety, and not just be like, oh, I'm good, I'm sober. Like, that's all that anyone wants from me and needs from me. Don't expect any more. And then I started to expect more for myself. you know?
Wow. Yeah, I mean, one of the things that we do in mental conditioning work is we hunt the good things. I think expectancy theory says that when you focus on things, they expand, and it works for good and it works for bad. And I think you're starting to see expectancy theory play out for you, because I started to just do one right thing, and I started to expect more out of myself. And that is the most empowering life we can lead, is when we start to just set expectations for ourselves and then meet them, and then we do want more out of our life. And what a journey you've been on. So I'll get to the question of, so for someone 18, 25, 32, in your situation, who's struggling and feels no hope and feels like they're suffering in silence, what's the couple of pieces of Lyle Wick advice that you can offer to them?
I think, like you said, one is just start with one right thing. And for me, that looked like I would lie about what gas station I was at. No idea why. But then I started to implement, okay, I'm actually going to call back and tell that person I lied, which was really hard because it was embarrassing. Like, why did I say I was at 76?
I had to lie. I had to call the car. I called the car salesman.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I don't have to call him. Car salesmen lie to people all the time. It's not about him. It's about you. How free do you want to be, Charlie? Do you want to live in the truth?
Exactly.
He may or may not. He may or may not pick up a drink if he doesn't tell the truth to sell a car. You, my friend, could die if you don't call him back.
Right.
But learning
rigorous
how to be honest.
honesty.
Yeah, it's when you've been lying since you were 5-6 years old and taking little Barbie doll shots at 7. I mean, we got a lot of ground to make up.
Exactly. And I think that is the biggest thing that I would tell someone else, is that if you're struggling and you're feeling like there's no hope, I think that's because you're living in shame. And so it's, how do we get past the shame, and the medicine for shame is honesty. And so I think breaking it down into really attainable things to be honest about, and starting small, to gain comfort, and you're chipping away at that shame. I would say also to really be patient with yourself, because I wouldn't say I was emotionally sober until I had 4 years of sobriety, when I really started to chip away at it, and I felt like I had nothing to show for the 4 years. But to try and, even if you don't believe it, treat yourself like you would treat someone you love. Because we have to, even if people don't understand and they have expectations that we should be acting a certain way by this point and we should have our stuff together, it's a journey. It really is. And I'm still growing. And so you get to have patience even if others don't.
Wow, powerful. And of course the overriding kind of theme of just asking for help and getting help was so important. And so, Mom, for the mothers and the fathers out there who feel trapped and have their own shitstorm going on in their lives, you've got such a unique perspective and such a compassionate way of being with yourself and with others. What are the things that you can help our listeners, that I know are going to be really interested to hear, what do I do? That's the number. What do I do?
The first thing that I would recommend doing is just taking a pause and looking at where you're at, keeping your life really small for the time being, maybe going in and canceling out things that aren't priorities, and being able to identify what the priorities are, and learning some languaging skills and how to communicate using I statements, acknowledging feelings, not getting hijacked by your emotions when you communicate with your loved ones, but staying super grounded and getting out of the results, because the results are off in the future and so can cause us to really future trip and worry. I think taking the next indicated action, which might be right in front of you, a minute away or 30 seconds away, keeping one day at a time. What's my day look like? What are my goals for the day? When we have loved ones that are going off the rails and they're in life-threatening situations, it's important to get ourselves collected and know what our plan is for ourselves, and not proceed forward with our emotions, but really acknowledge our emotions and get support and help, but learn the appropriate way to proceed.
Wow, that's both amazing and so inspiring. And I think it'd be remiss for me not to ask, what's the healing been like for both of you? I mean, having obviously gone through a lot of scars, family wise and relationship wise. What's been kind of the catalyst for the healing? I mean, to sit in front of me today as two very compassionate, vulnerable, and courageous women, who are also a mother and a daughter who both experience this, and to have you both sharing this side by side has been so remarkable for people to hear. What's been the catalyst for healing between you two that allows you to sit and acknowledge what both mother and daughter and mother went through, because that's possible too?
For me, the catalyst has always been about love. I love so deeply this woman sitting next to me. She is one of the most courageous people I have ever met in my life. And I never once stopped believing in her. And I knew I had a large part in her journey. And I have learned to love myself as much as I love her. I knew without my own growth, hers would be impossible. Not hers would be impossible. She could grow without me, but the kind of growth that would be whole for her, that would include a mother's growth and love. And because Lyle has been on the same trajectory and been so willing to grow herself, there's been a mutual respect and patience with both of us. We've gone to therapy together. We were in family therapy as a family with my ex-husband and Sally for well over a year and a half. Group therapy, individual therapy. I just think that we've been really devoted to wanting to be in the best version of our life, and we still are, and we find a lot of healing through helping other people.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that in a second. Lyle, what's your takeaway for the healing that's occurred between you and your mom?
I think I would say ditto to everything you just said. I think the fact that we both want to continue to grow and remain teachable and have the humility to continue on with that has been huge, because we are able to set boundaries with each other and communicate and ask for what we need. And I think honesty has been huge. That process, obviously, at the beginning was rough, of me getting honest about a lot of things that I gaslit her on, and called her crazy. And that moving forward into today, honesty looks different. It could just be like, hey, that hurt my feelings, or whatever it may be, but there's no harboring resentment when we're able to be honest, and it allows us to have an authentic, close relationship. That's really incredible. And I do agree, the passion piece, which is unique in our situation, is that we are both so passionate about helping families with a loved one suffering with addiction, and on my end, working with the individual who's struggling. And it's incredible that we get to use our story to help others and turn dark into light and do it together.
That's amazing. And let's talk about that. I'm harking back to when the Rose Castro and her daughter were here, the Castro Foundation, who've turned Jeremy's passing into a calling to help other adolescents, knowing that they lost their son through an overdose. They've turned that tragedy into helping others find recovery, which I think is one of the most courageous things, that I've witnessed, especially knowing the pain of losing a loved one, and then watching others get what you couldn't have is so selfless. And I know there's lots of studies that have been done around oxytocin and happiness, and one of the most the greatest creator of healing and happiness is the selfless involvement in another person's lives. And so you've come together to do that, And so tell us a little bit about Bridge the Gap and how people can find what you're doing. I know you do case management for substance abuse and mental health issues, and now you've come together. You've got a book in the work. You've got an online course in the works. Tell people about the things that you have come together to do to help so many people, which I'm so grateful for.
Okay, awesome. So Bridge the Gap is a company with case management services to help families be able to focus on their relationship and not play case manager. That's part of it. And we do therapeutic mentorship. So having someone who's not your therapist come in, who's relatable, help guide you. I was told, and this is obviously for substance abuse because mental health is different, but I was told to not, if I had a thought, run it by someone and discard it because my thinking got me to this place. And so to implement someone who's a healthy role model or companion, that's going to help you with your self-care and recovery schedule if it's substance abuse, and communication and all of that is really invaluable.
It is. I'm amazed by that. And I want people to understand, because I think, when they hear, this idea about not trusting our thoughts, what I think people need to understand is really the power of our subconscious level. Our subconscious is really what's keeping it. Our subconscious does a great job of keeping score of our failures, of our mistakes, of our problems, of our insecurities, of our doubts, fears, and worries. That's what it holds on to. 80% of our recurring thoughts tend to be negative. They tend to be trapped on those things. And so most of our thoughts are heavily influenced by our subconscious, which is keeping the score of these negative experiences that we've lived and really influencing our next thought with those negative experiences. It's a human characteristic. It's something that occurs. And so having, especially with a shame-based disease that's got a lot, the scoreboard's for us, pretty big, and it's pretty deep, and it's pretty weighted, because we have engaged in, as your mom was talking about, kind of shame-based behaviors that have kind of destroyed our moral compass. And so having somebody to filter those thoughts and to start to shift them into kind of the positive scoreboard, which we just don't have access to, because the subconscious is cut such that it's seen us in Compton, it's seen us in shame, it's seen us in guilt, and it's assuming that the rest of our life is going to need to reflect that. So when a thought comes up that I can't have or I won't have because I've done this, we really do need a new filter. Is that accurate?
Absolutely. I think like you said, it initially, of course, finding someone who you trust.
Yeah.
And running your ideas by them. It's like we're relearning how to walk, and we're relearning a moral compass and reconnecting to it. So yeah, I completely agree. I think that's huge. I started Bridge the Gap because I was someone who really struggled to implement what I had learned in therapy and treatment into my day-to-day.
Yep.
And I find that there is such a revolving door in getting help with mental health and substance abuse, of having relapses, because whether it's the family, which we added family mentoring, or just the inability, no matter what the intention is, to really apply what you're doing in your treatment to your day. Today is what I wanted to help with, is having recovery from mental health or addiction be sustainable, and empowering people to feel like they can do this on their own with a little help on the way, and to set that up. So we have therapeutic mentoring. We work with the families in helping them learn to set boundaries and take care of themselves. And in tandem, it creates a beautiful dynamic. And we are doing an online course, a series, but we're starting with one that is geared towards helping families with a loved one suffering from mental health or substance abuse, getting psychoeducation, learning some communication tools, how to set boundaries, what those may look like. And we'll go from there. And then the book is really on our experience, mother and daughter, of what happened. And also the purpose is to be educational, to help those who are struggling, a parent with a loved one or kid struggling with mental health and addiction.
Wow. Well, all I can say is dynamic duo comes to mind. If I have a family member struggling with this issue, I could not imagine really two better people to have wrapped around a situation than you two. And I want to thank you for being part of my life and part of this journey, and for coming on Overcome Out Loud and sharing such a deep and powerful story. It'll help so many people.
Thank you, Charlie.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you for having us.